Hey, let's continue making you an expert on MVVM. Until now, you already know how to implement the INotifyPropertyChanged interface, the iCommand interface, and now recently the iValueConverter interface. Now, the INotifyPropertyChanged interface works perfect for our person class, but what would happen if we have a list or a collection of persons? We will need another interface that will help us know whenever a new item is added or an item is deleted from the collection. And there's actually a very similar interface to the INotifyPropertyChanged interface, and that is called INotifyCollectionChanged. Now, this interface only has one event, which is the collection changed, and you will want to do something very similar to what you did with the INotifyPropertyChanged, but for what I think is a little bit complicated, because you would have to create a method which is going to be called whenever a new item is added, a method when a new item is deleted, a method when an item is changed, some values change in that item. So no, that is not good. It's not something I would do. So no, there has to be another way, and there is. And for the title of this video, you may already know that I'm not headed through the INotifyCollectionChanged, but for the observable collection of type. In this case, the type is going to be person. Now, why use this instead of the INotifyCollectionChanged? Well, let's just go to the definition, and oh, it already implements the INotifyCollectionChanged, and in fact, it already implements the INotifyPropertyChanged interfaces as well. So this has all that I would have to do with the INotifyCollectionChanged already implemented. So this class is everything that I need instead of having to do all the things that you will have to do if you were to implement the INotifyCollectionChanged interface. So this is very simple. Observable Collection is a class, and when I'm set it as the parent of the ViewModelBase class, suddenly the ViewModelBase class is now able to notify the UI whenever a new item is added, an item is deleted, or an item is changed from the ViewModelBase. Because now, since I'm already making this a child of the Observable Collection class, now ViewModelBase is also a collection of type person. So because of that, I could actually come back to the constructor, and I'm going to evaluate if I'm on design mode, just because I want to do something only on design mode. And what I want to do is that 10 times I want to add. Now, as you can see, I have the add method right here, and that is because the ViewModelBase class is already a collection. So I have the add method. Now, because this is a collection of persons, what the add method receives is an item of type person. So I will have to create a new person and set some values to its property. So for example, name is going to be person plus I. And last name is going to be last name plus I. And finally, gender. Well, this is tricky. I will just set everyone to be female. Like this. And maybe at the end I want to add a male, a lonely male. Now, of course, I is not existing in this context, like this. Okay, So now on the sign mode, I will have 10 females and 1 male for the collection. And the next thing that I want to do is change the parameter method to receive a person instead. So now I would actually, instead of writing to the debugger, I will add that person. And again, add is available as a method because when I made observable collection of type a parent of the viewModel-based class, now the viewModel-based class is also a collection of type person. Okay, now since I've changed the signature of this method, I of course need to change it also in the parameter command class. So as you can see, I am sending a string, which is not possible. I will send a person instead. Now, because I have changed the type of the parameter that I need, I would have to change the binding of the command. So the command parameter for that particular button has to be changed to be just binding. In this case, I'm going to be binding the entire data context, which is a person, instead of just the full name that I was doing before. So I don't want to bind the full name anymore. I want to bind the entire person, the entire data context as a person. So let's prove it. Let's try to add a breakpoint here and execute. Oh, but before what I want to change this to always return true. So I don't care whatever the using is sending, I just want to return true right now. So now let's run this. And I don't know, write some values to the person. And when I press the parameter command, as you can see, I'm actually navigated to the parameter method, which receives a person. And as you can see, person actually has those values bound to it that are coming from the UI. So the gender and the full name and the last name and everything is right there. And then I can continue to add it to the viewModel-based class, which remember is now a collection. But where's the fun to it if we cannot see those things inside of the UI? So below the last button, I'm going to add a ListView. And let me show you what is going to happen on the sign time. So I'm going to have this right here. Hopefully you are able to see everything. And the list view, I'm actually going to bind it to the viewModel base. Now remember that the viewModel base is now a collection. So if I change the data context of this list view to be bound to a static resource, which is going to be viewModel, suddenly the list view, even though it's inside of the grid, no longer has the data context of the grid. It now has its own data context. Now that the data context of this list view is set, all of the elements inside of the viewModel can actually be drawn inside of the list view. In fact, remember that on the sign time, I have 11 people inside of that viewModel. So if I set the item source to be binding, look what happens. Suddenly, there are some elements. Let me just zoom in a little bit. There are now elements in here. Now, what you are looking at is the interpretation of a class or the calling of a class to string. So the object class, which is like the base class for every single class, has a toString method that tries to transform any object to a string. So the toString method of the viewModel base class is returning this. Now, just to prove that this is actually true, let's just head back to the viewModel base. and try to override the toString method, and you can see that it is right there. But now, instead of returning just the toString like this, what I want to do, in fact, it's not from the view model base. What is being shown here is a person, not a view model base. Okay, so let me just come to the person class, and now I do want to override the toString method. And what I want to return is the full name instead of just calling the base toString. So if let's head back here, and if I build this, you should be able to see the change in here. And as you can see, it now shows the full name instead of just something that we wouldn't understand. So right now, your application is kind of working. So let's just try this out. And I believe I'm going to have to make some changes. Let's try this. Let's add a new female. And it is going to be added. Let me just delete this breakpoint. And as you can see, it is right there. Okay, I wrote it incorrectly, but it is right there. So it's been added to the view model base, which is a collection, and now it is bound to the list view that I have added here. Right, but this doesn't, well, I don't like it that much. Let me just change things a little bit. So I will head back to my list view, and these kind of items, the list view, the grid view, you can actually change the template for the items. So if I start writing listview.item template, I can actually change how the items are going to look. Now, the element that the item template takes is the data template. So now everything inside of the data template is going to be the way that an item inside of this list view is going to show. So I will start by adding a grid. And I want to borrow the background from the main grid, just because I want the gender to have something to do with the background of this grid, the gender of each of the people that are going to be added. And I also want to change the size of this grid. So I will set the width to be 400 and the height to be 50. Yeah, perfect. And as you can see, all those grids are now added, and I have all females, and the male is not showing because it's at the end of the collection. But now I can start adding more things. So I will just add a text block, and the text of the text block, I want it to be bound to the full name of the person. Great, so look at the result. It's just very simple. Let me just vertically align this to the center and add a tiny margin like this. Okay, great. Maybe the grid was too big. Let's just go ahead and run this one more time and see this actually working. In this case, I'm going to add a male first. And as you can see, it is added. Now you can't see particularly well that the background of this grid is actually blue, but let me change here. And as you can see, as I keep adding, all these things are changing with the data inside of the data context. Now this is because I am adding the exact same object. And remember that an object is just a reference. So all these objects are pointing to the exact same part of the memory, allocation of the memory. So I need to change that. Now, in order for me to change that and for this application to work perfectly What I want to do is when I add a new person, through the parameter method, what I want to do is create a new person. And I want to set its values, the gender, to be that of the person that I'm receiving, and so on and so forth with each of its properties. And I will actually want to add that new person. Now, this is an entirely new object, so it's allocated in another way in the memory, in another piece of memory. So when I change the previous object, I should now be good to go. So I will add a new person here. I add it. Now let me change here, and as you can see, that is indeed left with the previous versions or the previous data. So now if I add a new one, you can see that the value is no longer changing on the collection because each of these is a different object, and I can keep adding and adding, and they just won't change because they're different objects now. Great. So hopefully now you understand how to use an observable collection. It is very simple. You just have to make the observable collection of type a parent of your class. In this case, I added some items on design mode, so I can actually look at them on design time on the designer, which is one of the many good features of MVVM and data binding. And I also I received in the parameter method through the command, I receive a new person, and I have to create a new person to be added to the collection. And well, in here, I just bound that collection to a list view and added a data template for the item template. So in fact, if I were to delete this item template, I would still have all of those persons bound to the list view, but that is not how I want each person to look. So I can actually add a template for the items. So the item template of a list view or a grid view takes a data template, and inside of the data template you can just draw whatever you want. In this case, I bound the background of the data template to be from the converter that we used in the previous lecture. And I also bound the full name to a text block, so you can see that the result is pretty much what I expected.
So, without further ado, I have to encourage you again to go and check my Windows Universal App Development course. Now, we will be covering everything about MVVM here on YouTube in the coming videos. But if you want to learn just a lot more about other stuff regarding Windows Universal App Development, go ahead and check this course. Like I said, during the course, we talk about a lot of things, not only MVVM. In the course, you could actually find the foundations of using SAML with C#. You can also learn a little bit more about object-oriented programming. We will actually be integrating Visual Studio Online as a version control of your Windows applications. We will be covering adding more pages to an application. We are going to be covering text to speech and speech to text, so you can talk directly to your application, or so your application can talk to you back. We're going to take pictures with your application. We're going to use persistence with application settings and SQLite databases, notifications through the live tiles, HTTP integration, this MVVM course, Azure, sharing code between platforms, a lot of things. So why don't you go ahead and give it a look, and if you like it, you like how it looks, go ahead and purchase it for only $29, just for you who's watching this video. $29 instead of $129, which is the original price. Now you have the link right there. or you will have the link in the description below. Just make sure to check it out and start getting ready for Windows 10.